For everybody else who's just joining us, welcome. It's Living Hope Online. We're here. We want to thank you for showing up. Thank you for coming and watching us. We're super excited that you're here. And part of what we do while we sit up here and converse is really to interact with you. That's our main goal, is to be able to interact with you at home or wherever you happen to be at. And so absolutely join in. We love to be able to hear from you guys. We love to be able to interact with you. And share this video, again, if you're just joining us. And that gets the word out there, and it helps us to be able to be a part of the conversation with other people and for other people to join in. So we are excited to hear kind of what you have to say tonight. So tonight we're going to actually be talking about mistakes. And when I even was briefly announcing this a few minutes ago, kind of talking this up, that people were excited. You guys were excited. Anybody in this room was excited that we were talking about mistakes. So it is hard to say where the conversation is going to go tonight. There was a lot of laughter about how we're not defined by our mistakes. So that's fun. We'll get to see how that plays out as we hear what everybody has to say. But that's kind of the direction we're going, is mistakes and mistakes that people have made. So again, if you have just joined us, our first question that we're going to ask is, who is somebody in pop culture, somebody who's famous, who you can think of who has maybe been defined by a mistake they make or they have made? And before we answer, and while people are thinking, we're going to go around and introduce ourselves so you know who you're talking to. Again, I'm Justin. Excited to have you here. And then we'll jump to Charlene.
I'm Charlene.
I'm Mary.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Patrick.
Hi, all. I'm Susan.
And Susan actually will be your guys' voice tonight. So if you're interacting with us on Facebook and you're making comments, which please do, we're excited to hear from you, then Susan will be your voice to be able to tell us kind of what you're saying. And so absolutely interact with Susan. You'll be able to hear, hopefully, what your input is throughout the night, too. So what do you think, guys? Somebody who is famous, who's been defined by a mistake they've made.
Pete Rose.
Oh, yeah.
Rose. Okay, so in case there's somebody out there that doesn't know, what mistake is it that he's made?
Well, Pete Rose was a baseball player for the Cincinnati Reds. He was denied entry into the Baseball Hall of Fame because he gambled against the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah.
And now that's about all that he is remembered for, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't thought about that one. Somebody else who has been defined by a mistake they've made. One of the people I thought of as I was trying to think through this stuff, and maybe they're not defined by this, and maybe it's just a mistake that I've thought of recently, but anybody see the video of like when they were doing the Tesla truck windows?
Oh, yes.
So supposedly this truck has bulletproof windows. Nothing can shatter these windows, whatever, yada, 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 windows, right? Nothing's going to happen to him. And so they have this guy stand up on stage in front of this huge crowd, and they're like, he's going to throw this ball bearing, or something to that effect, at this window, and nothing's going to happen. And the guy throws the ball bearing, it shatters the window. And so then Elon Musk, right, who runs the company, says, the guy kind of looks at him, and he says, yeah, do the back window. And the guy shatters the back window, too, and I thought, well, this is, maybe don't do the second window. Yeah, maybe stop at the first window.
Yeah. Some folks online, and hi to Carrie and Sandy and Bonnie and everybody else who's joining. Couple of people who were defined by a mistake. We've got Tiger Woods, Monica Lewinsky, and
wow.
I mean, some people, and that's.
I think it's funny that they say Monica Lewinsky, but they don't say Bill Clinton.
Right.
Isn't that
interesting?
Right.
Or interesting that really he wasn't defined by maybe as a culture, that mistake.
Right.
That's interesting.
That is very interesting to me.
Those are good ones. Tiger Woods is a good one. I like that one. I hadn't thought of that one either.
What did Tiger Woods do?
Cheated on his wife.
I am not at all on pop culture, so.
Yeah, he cheated on his wife.
Oh, well, that would define somebody, I think, for a little while.
Well, going way back, we could say Nixon. He made,
that's
you
a good
know,
one.
and look what happened, you know.
Yeah.
I was living then.
Well, that's good to know. All right, so then let's make it slightly more personal and maybe a little bit more awkward. Right? So have you ever, and maybe you just want to go with yes or no, and that's fine. I'm not going to make you bare your soul to everybody. But do you feel like you've ever been defined by a mistake? Online, again, whether you're watching live or even a rebroadcast, is there a time that you feel like you've ever been defined by a mistake? And then, maybe even more than that, how does it impact you, and how did it impact you when you were defined by that mistake? It's a tough one to answer.
It is tough, and you don't know how you're defined by something you've done, whether you think it's right or wrong or a mistake or not, unless people tell you about it. So we're back to, and we talked about this last week a little bit, perception. And so something that I've done, I might not think is a mistake, but somebody else may look at it and go, oh my gosh, and then they think something of me that I may have no idea that they think that of me. So I don't know. I don't know if I've been defined by a mistake. I've done things that maybe I would have done differently, but I don't know that that defines me. Now, what other people think of me, if that's their only interaction with me, and that's their first impression, and it was bad, which, I have made mistakes, unlike our friend Mary over there.
I've never made one.
You got a good streak going.
So I can't really answer that question, because something I've done, and some things that I've done, I think I shouldn't have done, and then other people are like, oh, that was no big deal. So
sometimes so what you're saying really is that sometimes there are times that we define ourselves by mistakes we make, but that doesn't necessarily mean that other people are defining us that way.
I thought you said this, that other people would define you.
And I think that's true in the pop culture. When we're talking about these famous folks, they may have done something, and some of the things are bigger than others, but sometimes it's something that, I know, like for Bill and Hillary Clinton, Monica Lewinsky came into the picture. Well, a lot of people were like, well, that's their business. Why is this such a big thing? Well, does it get blown out of proportion when people latch onto something that somebody does?
What do you think does that? What do you think makes it a big deal to people and makes people define people, I said people a lot, by their mistakes, though, and what makes it us sometimes gloss over it?
Well, go ahead.
Better to gloss over it than judge them by their mistakes, And I think we can be pretty good at that. I don't have any mistakes that I think defines me. I've made mistake.
Sure.
But it doesn't define me. I've never allowed it to. Other people may think something different of me because they've seen that mistake, but I don't. Why let it define you? It is what it is. If you make a mistake, and if it's against God, you ask for repentance, or you fix it somehow, but don't let it define you. I just haven't.
We've got somebody online who says, I think I was defined for a bit, but then I was forgiven, but I can't stop thinking about it, that I'm still judged by it. So sometimes even when you've made a mistake and
you're
gone
okay
away,
with the other people.
You're okay with the other people, but then you just keep thinking of it yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Patrick, what were you going to say a minute ago?
Well, I was just saying there's kind of a two-part to that because, like, some people will like to latch on to other people's mistakes because then they can hide their own mistakes. Like, well, let's focus on their mistakes, so nobody pays attention to mine.
Yeah.
And then for other people, like for me, it's like when I see somebody else make a mistake, especially if it's the same mistake that I've made, it makes me feel more, I don't feel as, I know what I'm trying to say here. It's not, I don't want to say that it's not as bad, but it makes me feel better about it because I know that somebody else has made that mistake too, and that I'm not alone. And it's I feel kind of like a support type group type thing, It's like
Sure. Yeah, I think that even the comment from online, Susan, who now I'm just speaking to you as if you're the online person, but I think that's an interesting thought, though, right? Is that even if we've been forgiven or asked for forgiveness from whoever maybe a mistake has affected, that idea that we ourselves tend to hold on to that for a little bit, and for a long bit at times, whether it's big, huge mistakes or not. I remember when I first started working at the job I'm at now, and it's without getting too much into what I do, I'm working with some tough kids, and I was walking with one of those kids who was having a hard time, and it was one of my first few weeks at the job, and I was there with my boss, and this kid, as we walked by this certain sink, had like a gooseneck. I think that's what it's called, gooseneck, the big looks like a goose's neck.
Oh, the
I don't
faucet.
know. Yeah, and this kid grabs it, and I can still, in that moment, I can still right now picture that moment because my job, I felt like, was to make sure nothing crazy happened. And I can remember my boss saying, no, 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 no. And as this kid yanked on it so many times that the whole sink bent up, and we had that sink for years and years, and it was bent up for years. And anytime I would walk past that sink, even though nobody ever said anything to me about it, I always thought about that. I always thought, I let that happen. I shouldn't have let that happen, and I let that happen. And I think that's interesting because sometimes we're the people that keep those mistakes alive, And I think that's an interesting, I think that's interesting human dynamic, I guess.
It is. I just wanted to say hi to a few more people who joined, Courtney and Chris and Angela and Lori and Todd and Rachel. We're all glad you're here. Angela said, how do we separate how we define ourselves versus how others define us? Does it make you question the definition of yourself? And I think you touched on that too, but do we change how we define ourselves based on what other people say about us?
Oh, definitely. I mean,
Well, flat, definitely.
Well, because I was thinking about this from the beginning because I can't say that I made a lot of mistakes, the mistakes that I was being blamed for. But after hearing it so many times, I finally was like, you know what? I want to find out what this is all about. And I'm going to use an example like drugs. I can remember, teachers calling my parents at home because I had diabetes. I would have a low blood sugar, and teachers would call home and, your kid's on drugs, So anyway, because I could go on for that for a while. But after a while, and a couple of schools of doing that, I finally was like, if I'm going to be blamed for this, or if these are the mistakes these people are telling me I'm making, I want to find out what this is all about. Let's make this mistake. And, so I did. And that ended up defining my life a lot, growing up. The way I look, the way I talk, the way I dress was because of,
People's perception.
The way people define me.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I just thought of one of the songs we sang at church on Sunday was, I am who you say I am. So I am who others say I am.
I'm a product of what society has made me.
But I think that's interesting, though, isn't it? When people assume that we're making a mistake, if they say it long enough, that we potentially buy into that ourselves.
Well, but I also believe, too, that, it took me a long time to realize that things that people say about me only have meaning if I give it meaning.
Right.
So if I allow Medea, actually one of the best sayings I ever heard was, it's not what somebody calls you, it's what you answer to. So, because people can say whatever they want, like they can say you're a drug addict or whatever, but if you don't allow that to have any meaning, then it's not going to bother you,
So how long do you feel like you said, it took you a long time to kind of buy into that thought or figure that out? How long?
Well, it took me a long time because, going back to mistakes, it wasn't my own mistake, and I've made plenty of mistakes, believe me. But it wasn't really my own mistake that defined me, as it was, my mom wasn't married when she was pregnant with me. And so I remember from a really young age, an aunt saying that I was a bastard. So as a small child, I didn't know what it meant then.
Sure.
But as I got older, I knew what, I learned what a bastard meant. And that kind of made me feel from jump that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, because, this is somebody in my own family saying that, which I never told my mom that, because if I would have, she would have told me different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so, not, whatever she thought was my mom's mistake actually went on to impact me.
Yeah, it impacted you.
Yeah. Because that's how my aunt saw me, as this, which was her own jacked up whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So,
okay, so let's flip the table a little bit, right? So how have you maybe define somebody, and let's take it off of like the famous route, right? And you obviously don't need to get super specific with, with people that you've defined by mistakes, but have you ever defined somebody yourself by a mistake that somebody else has
yes.
made? And then to maybe step outside ourselves just a little bit, how do you think that that's impacted them?
Well, for me, I think that, first of all, we are great storytellers. All of us are great storytellers because our brain works like it gets all this information that we see, we hear, whatever, and it comes in and we try to make sense out of it. So have you ever like seen a person walking around, let's say this is totally made up, say walk around Walmart and you see a person standing near jewelry, all right, and you just happen to be walking and you see them, they're holding this jewelry and then they look this way and they look that way. And then, so what immediately comes to your head? You think this person is going to steal it, right?
Yes.
Because our brain gets information, because the facts are, all we seen was this person standing here holding a piece of jewelry. That's it. But our brain has to make sense of it some way. And so we automatically say, well, that looks sneaky, you know? So I think that, and this is something that God showed me because of my own doing, assuming things, was that we pretty much, we judge other people by their actions and we judge ourselves by our intentions. Because
That's interesting.
Yeah, because in my head, well, I did this because I was intending to do this, right? But we can only judge other people by what they're actually doing or what we perceive they're doing. And that has really changed me judging people because I'm like, I don't know why they're doing what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
I was saying, see, now my thought was that they were looking for their significant other
See?
to just show.
And that's what I'm saying. So, and whatever we assume or whatever we come together in our mind to make this right in our heads is based on what everything's been filtered through. Like, so every incident that happened to me in my life, like thinking that when I was young,
Sure.
that filters through that. So every experience we've had changes how we view what other people are doing.
Yeah.
So, and that's all God. That was years He did that. But, you know, so now I don't try to do that anymore. I look when I see something, even if it looks like something, I'm like, nope, God, let's check this. You know, this is the facts. This is what I see. I don't add anything else into it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so then how do you think it does impact people when we define them by a mistake that they've maybe made or make a quick judgment based off of a few of their actions? I'd be interested to hear that. Like, how have we taken much time to try to step outside of ourselves and understand or even make a guess about how our judgments are defining people by a mistake they've made has impacted them? Again, online, would love to hear from you and would love to be able to just get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think, what Charlene said was really, really good about people not having the context. So they don't know they only know what they perceive and what has informed that decision that they've made. So when somebody assumes something about me, I tend to do the same thing. It's like, oh, if you're going to dismiss me, I'm going to dismiss you, and I care not. And so I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I do the same thing, right? I've not made a mistake necessarily, but they've assumed something about me or not assumed something about me, and so I therefore assume something about them.
Yeah.
Without us
How dare
actually
they
having
judge
this.
me?
Yeah.
Sure.
Get very
sure.
defensive,
Yes,
or
yes.
or sometimes you can get very hurt. And allow it to bother you, and then you think, oh, I'm not, that person knows so much more or something, and you can put people up on a pedestal if you think that they've got this authority over you.
Yeah.
And you make yourself smaller. So there are all sorts of different ways this can work, and I'm talking with my hands way too much.
No, I think that's good, and that's an interesting thought. So we're talking about being able to put people up on a pedestal, and really, one of the people that we were talking about as far as mistakes go, when you look back at the Bible, is David. So King David, right, is probably the most well-known king that we have from Israel. It's David from David and Goliath, right? Like, he's that David, so he's kind of a big deal right away, right? He's done all these great things and is a solid ruler, right? But what we find is that he also makes some pretty big mistakes, partly because of where he stands in the scheme of his society and everything else. So as his army's off fighting war, they're out doing like what he's saying they should do and conquering who he's saying they should go conquer. He's home, he's at his palace, he's up on the roof, he's taking a look around, and he sees somebody out bathing on a roof. And he's like, you know what? I would like to get to know that lady better. And so he does. And in doing so, she becomes pregnant, right? And then they find out really quick that it's not just nobody, it's somebody's wife. And it's somebody's wife that's off fighting this war for him, right? And for Israel in general. And so he tries to cover up any number of ways, and we don't need to get into necessarily all of the nitty-gritty of that. But the bottom line is, in trying to cover it up, he ends up killing her husband to cover this whole thing up. So now not only is he kind of a huge jerk, but now he's a huge jerk and a murderer, right? And yet he's the king. And he's somebody that's been defined as being somebody after God's own heart. And he's David, he killed Goliath, like this is who this guy is. And yet he has this massive mistake that he thinks he's covered up, but turns out, if you go back and read the story there in the Bible, it tells us that one, God wasn't happy, but then two, one of his advisors named Nathan comes and shows up and gives him a quick little story that shows, hey, you screwed up. And it's interesting that when Nathan comes and says to him, hey, you did the following things wrong, and it's not all right. That David could have done a bunch of different things, because guy's still king, right? But his first instinct is to say, I've sinned, I've screwed up.
Yep.
You're absolutely right, I screwed up, and I need to make it right. Like, I'm sorry, I need to make this right. I think that's interesting, and I think it takes us to the next place when we're talking about mistakes, right? So when we do make mistakes, because all of us but Mary do, or maybe she just doesn't get defined by them. But when we make mistakes, are we people, and I've been very interested to hear the answer to this question. Are we people here, online, live, rebroadcast, are you somebody that likes to actually ask for forgiveness, or do you prefer to pretend like it didn't happen, and like, oh, we all know I made the mistake, but let's just move on? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, 6 years ago, I would have hidden from it.
Okay.
Now, I ask for forgiveness. I'm not afraid to ask for forgiveness now, because I know that, I can't be forgiven if I don't forgive. So.
Okay. That's good. What about you guys? What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of times people just skim over it because they make a mistake and they always have a reason why they did that.
Yeah.
They have an excuse. And so it's not so bad because I did it only because,
Yeah.
And that might end up defining a person because you're keeping it, I think it's a good sign of spiritual growth when you can ask somebody to forgive you.
I like this. Thank you, John, actually. The older I get, the more prone I am to asking for forgiveness. And that's so true because I
I'm
love
older.
getting older. I'm just
I love getting older.
a lot of parts of getting older. I don't like the pain and stuff, but because I don't care so much about what other people think.
Amen.
So, yeah. I mean, truly, because when I was younger, 20 years ago, I would hide. I would just gloss over things, or I would just, put up the blinders and have tunnel vision and hope that nobody saw anything bad that I did, or just pretend it didn't happen. But I don't care that much anymore. I mean, I care, but
Yeah.
I don't care what other people
Less,
think.
yeah. Okay, so then here's another good question. When somebody says, hey, I'm sorry, I screwed up. I really messed this up. Are you a person then that typically would say, I forgive you? Or are you a person that says, don't worry about it? And what do you think the difference is there in impact? Is there a difference between, hey, don't worry about it, and I forgive you?
Well, the other person, when you say don't worry about it, may not take that as forgiveness. It's, they're not saying, I like to tell a person I forgive them, because that's down to the nitty gritty. There's no, no, well, I'm sorry, whatever. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's very hard. Got to tell a story.
Yeah, go for it.
Everybody knows I'm a storyteller. I had a lady that just absolutely, I think she hated me. And I didn't know why. I had no idea why. And I had searched and searched myself, what have I done to cause this? Or, and honestly, I couldn't find it. And I was praying one night. The thought came to me about forgiveness. And I said, Lord, I can't forgive that lady. I mean, how many of us have done that? And I just kept feeling that, and I said, Lord, I'm not willing to forgive her. I'm telling bad about me now, right? I am not willing to forgive her. But the Holy Spirit was really ministering, and before it was over, I was able to say, I'm willing to be made willing by the Holy Spirit. And I did. I did forgive her. And, when you truly forgive, I think those things are now put in the past, not held in front of anybody anymore. And because that's what Christ does. He forgives us, and it's gone. It's in the past.
So you think there's power in that, though, then, right? I mean, I think that's what we're saying, is there's a little bit of power in actually forgiving somebody, not just for them, but for yourself, too.
It's freedom.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I never
so...
realized it, but I'm a person that says, don't worry about it.
Well, somebody asked on here too,
Yeah.
what's the difference between no worries and I forgive you? It might be
and that's
interchangeable.
that was what I was going to say, because like when you ask somebody, how are you? And they say, I'm fine. 9 out of 10 times when somebody says they're fine,
They're not.
they're not.
fine.
And I was told this once, and I'm not going to say it the way I actually say it, but I was told that, like fine meant effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. And when you think about that, when somebody says, oh, I'm fine, it's exactly what that means. So when you ask that question, that's what I thought. When somebody says, oh, don't worry about it. That's like saying, well, don't you worry about it, but I'm going to.
Well,
Because I'm not, whereas if you say, I forgive you, then you're...
Sure.
But for me, when I'm saying that, I'm saying it as in, don't worry about it because I've done the same thing. Do you know what I'm saying? That's how I mean it when I'm saying it, but I never thought about how the other person takes
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Because they may very well be saying that I think that I'm saying don't worry about it because I know you're going to screw up again, or you know what I mean? Who
Right.
knows?
Sure.
Yeah.
It could be coming off.
That's what I
kinda-
expected. Don't worry about it. I
don't
expected
worry
that
about it.
from
I
you.
expected you to.
Yeah,
do
I
it.
swear I expected
I mean,
you to
it
be.
really could come off like that.
Yeah,
So.
and then saying,
Yeah,
I
then
forgive
saying,
you,
I forgive you.
like Mary said, is
But when
like
I
right to the...
for me to say the words "I forgive you," it doesn't sit right coming out of my mouth because it's like I've screwed up so many times. What right do I have to say "I forgive you"?
Well, how many people forgave you when you
Well,
screwed up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
See?
do you know what I'm saying? Like coming off my tongue, it makes me
Sure.
feel like I'm like
Yeah,
being
and I think-
superior or something.
yeah, and I
like,
think if you can
forgive
step
you.
outside
I
and-
forgive
Yeah.
you, my child.
Yeah.
I
And
don't know.
see
That's
how
weird to
but
me.
see how it impacts other people to
Right.
be forgiven. I think that's such an important thing to be able to
It
do.
is.
Maybe not all the time, but I think it's interesting to have in our minds. Okay, so if we're saying that our mistakes don't define us, then what does define us, right? And so part of what we're saying here tonight is that our mistakes and the mistakes we've made in the past, what we have done, doesn't say who we are. God actually gets to say who we are. And so
Amen.
who does God say that we are? And just really quick to fire these off, God says that we're loved people. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, everybody in the world, that we're his children, we're God's children. See what great love God has lavished on us. Again, we're loved. That we should be called children of God, that we have purpose. And Jeremiah tells us, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future, right? And that we're forgiven. And I think this is an interesting one, that we're a forgiven people, right? And we have this whole story about a prodigal son that Jesus himself tells, that says, for this son, when this kid goes off, does all this stuff, now he comes home to the father should have pretty much written him off. And instead he says, for this son of mine was dead, and he is now alive again. He was lost, and he was found. He's forgiving him in that moment. We're forgiven people. So if we're loved, if we're full of purpose, if we're forgiven people, then what does that mean for me? What does that mean for you, if that's who we really are?
If that's who we really are, what defines us? So not our mistakes, but how we respond to the situation that we find ourselves in. Because even if we don't make a mistake, sometimes we're in these bad situations. So how we respond to this, you said David, when Nathan came to him and said, dude, you messed up, and God is not happy, and this is going to happen. And David was remorseful. And then if you read about his son, Solomon, later on, he wasn't so much. And it was their responses. So,
Sure.
David has this house that, your house is going to live forever and everything. And Solomon, okay, you're going to lose your kingdom and everything's going to be destroyed. And that was very much based on, they both made mistakes, but how they responded to being called out on those mistakes,
Yeah.
I think, was what defined them. Because it's character, right? It's what you really are inside and how you behave when the stuff hits the fan, I guess.
Sure.
Well, I think what defines us is what Justin just said. How does God see me? How does God see me? And a wonderful way to pray is, Lord, let me see me the way you do.
Mm-hmm.
And take you a long way. But he has, this defines me. He loves me. And one of my favorite things is he's made us worthy. We're worthy, And if we're worthy, then we need to forgive other people. It's going to be in us, I think, to forgive. That defines me. Now, I'm lots older than everybody else here, but that defines me.
When I was thinking about it, I was just thinking that if I'm forgiven by God, if you guys are all forgiven by God, and you are, that's just a reality. And so if that's the case, then what that means for me is that I'm actually really free to be able to work towards either accepting that or to work towards forgiving myself for mistakes that I've made. Because that means that God's not holding those kinds of things against me. I'm now freed up, not chained up by other people's thoughts or expectations of me or what God ultimately thinks of me, but I'm free to go now make that work and do that work on myself, which sometimes takes us plenty of time.
Well, and another thing too, it's also easier for you to offer that kind of forgiveness to
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, and really the last question. If we're forgiven, and not just I'm forgiven, but if we are all forgiven, and we are, can't stress that enough, we're all forgiven and loved, right? And if that's the case, then what does that mean when I go out and I act and interact with other people? And how does that change how I interact with other people? Again, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What are you guys thinking? How does that change how we interact?
I want everybody to feel that. I want everybody to feel and to know what it feels like because first of all of that is true, but the first thing is that we have to believe that. Even when we're in making horrible mistakes, because we will, and when we're screwing up, we still have to come back to that. And you may have to say it to yourself 100 times a day that, I am a child of God. He loves me. He never will leave me nor forsake me no matter what I do. I could never make him stop loving me, and I could never make him love me more. And once you can get that really down deep in your heart and you can share that with other people,
Yeah.
That is just like,
That is what you become.
that's what you become.
Yeah. So it's defining.
It is defining.
Yeah, and then our actions, and I think that's what's so important, is our actions when we treat others as if they're forgiven, because again, they are. And if we treat others as if they're loved by God, because again, they are, then all of a sudden we can help other people reshape how they define themselves. And I think that's such an important thing, because while that's not on us to do, I think that a little bit it is. to be honest with you. That's kind of our job when we speak our job as people who claim to follow Jesus. That's part of our job, is to help people redefine who they are. And I think just as we talked about this, and kind of closing thoughts, really, when I think about what we've been saying, Charlene, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, you have to be able to accept that at some point, right? But to accept that, or to not accept it, doesn't change the truth behind it. And I think that if you're out there tonight and you're questioning that and you're thinking, I don't know that I'm necessarily somebody that's loved by God, and I don't go to church, and I don't pray, I don't read my Bible, I don't do these things, that doesn't matter. That's not your love. The love God gives to you is 0% dependent on anything you do.
Amen.
And that's what's so shockingly grace-filled about it.
Yes.
Is that it's not on us
It
at
has
all.
nothing to do with us,
No.
actually.
Right.
It's
Right.
who he
Yeah,
is.
absolutely. Well, we thank you guys for watching with us tonight, for joining in the conversation, for being here with us. Hopefully, you were able to pull something from this. And whether you're watching live or a rebroadcast, quite frankly, honestly, we would still love to hear your opinions and your thoughts.
And
It's
questions.
And questions.
Questions,
Absolutely.
yes.
I agree. We're actually going to cut the mics here in a second, and so you'll still see the video. The mics will be off. We're going to raise some music. Lift up some music. I don't know why I said it that way. But we're going to raise some music and just have some music playing. If you'd like to continue to interact with us online, we're still going to have several people that are logged on that can interact and listen to questions, engage in the conversation more. If you have something you want to say, please do. And if you think there are people out there that you are friends with that would like to interact in this conversation or need to hear this conversation, quite honestly, man, like this video, share this video, and let people know about this video so that they are able to interact with it too. Let's go out the rest of this week and interact with other people, not solely based on what their actions are, but really based off of who they were truly created to be. I think that's really important. And thanks so much again. We'll see you guys next week, right here, 7:30. Good night.